Madam President, we have just invoked cloture on the nomination of Michael S. Regan, President Biden's nominee to be Administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency. The vote was 65-35. I want to say to every Democrat and every Republican and maybe an independent or two, thank you for your votes. I rise today to talk about this nomination and more particularly about the person, the man who's been selected to serve as our EPA Administrator. As members of this deliberative body, each one of us has taken an oath to protect and defend our U.S. Constitution. That oath includes offering our advice and our concern when it comes to nominations of a president to fill posts in his or her administration. It's hard to think of a time in modern history when the Senate's role on nominations could be considered more urgent. We're living in a time of great challenges. Our nation faces multiple crises all at once. This includes the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, the first in 100 years of this nature, the worst economy since the Great Depression, as well as a reckoning of racial injustice. All three of these crises are interconnected with a fourth that is even greater and graver than any emergency the United States may have ever faced before, and that is the climate crisis. President Biden recognizes the importance and urgency of tackling this challenge. That is why he ran with a promise to make climate action a core of his administration's work and of our work. It's also part of the reason why a record-setting majority of the American people voted for him into office last November. There are few leadership roles in the federal government that have greater responsibility for setting environmental and climate policy than that of the Administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency. This role has a profound responsibility to ensure that the agency effectively carries out its mission to protect our health and our environment. That mission is particularly challenging right now. We know that the next EPA Administrator has his work cut out for him. He knows it as well. In addition to addressing the serious environmental issues that are affecting Americans, the next EPA Administrator will also need to rebuild an agency suffering from organizational drift and low morale after being repeatedly damaged in recent years by flawed leadership. Scientific integrity has also been under attack. We need a strong, principled leader to get the EPA back on track. Michael Regan is the right person for the job at this critical moment. He is a man of deep faith who believes, as I believe we all do, that we have a moral obligation to be stewards of this planet on which we live together. Michael Regan is the kind of person who can help unite us in common purpose as we respond to the climate crisis we face, as well as to clean our air, clean our water, strive to make sure that we don't leave some of our communities, some of our neighbors behind in our efforts to do so. He knows how to put together and inspire teams of men and women who are mission-focused and can together tackle complex problems and challenges. As Secretary of North Carolina's Department of Environmental Quality, he has proved himself to be an effective policy executive and bipartisan problem solver, someone who forges practical solutions to clean our air and clean our water while building a more nurturing environment for job creation and job preservation. Anyone who's watched the EPA over the past few years knows that Mr. Regan will have his hands full as administrators, from scandal to climate denial to the unrelenting disregard for the opinions of career scientists throughout EPA. The past two administrators leave in their wake a frustrated workforce, suffering from organizational drift and low morale at what may be an all-time low. One of the keys to restore that morale is returning scientific integrity to the agency. Let me say that again. One of the keys to restoring the morale in the EPA is returning to scientific integrity. That also means curbing the influence of special interests on EPA's scientific advisory boards, which play a large role in crafting the agency's policies. Mr. Regan will be tasked with combating climate change, the greatest environmental crisis we are facing as a world today. On this issue, we have no time to waste. I know my state of Delaware does not have the luxury to wait a minute longer. We are the lowest lying state in the country. The state is sinking, and the seas around us are rising. and we're not the only state in which that is happening. This is felt by other states across the country, too. One unlikely state you might find is Louisiana. Louisiana is, according to John Neely Kennedy, one of the Republican senators there, told me last month, he said his state, Louisiana, is losing, get this, a football field of wetlands to rising sea levels every 100 minutes. Think about that. A football field of wetlands to rising sea levels every 100 minutes. I see the signs of this crisis too clearly as I travel throughout my state, Madam President. Eroding shorelines, waterlogged roads, and extreme weather threaten our economy and our way of life. Erratic weather patterns make farming some of our biggest crops, and we raise a lot of soybeans, and I know in your state you raise a couple of soybeans as well, but we raise a lot of soybeans, and it makes farming, and when they're raising soybeans or corn or chickens, a lot more difficult. Mr. Regan saw similar problems around another Wilmington, not Wilmington, Delaware, but Wilmington, North Carolina. Problems similar to what we see every day in Wilmington, Delaware. He understands that we do not have to choose between economic growth and clean air and clean water. It is indeed a false choice. He knows, like many of our world's leaders, that combating this crisis presents instead a chance for real economic growth that can create millions of good-paying American jobs and breathe life into communities large and small throughout this country. And we know that the economic cost of spending a little today more than outweighs the cost of inaction. I believe it was Ben Franklin who once said, "An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure." I know we all think that is a quote that comes from our grandmothers. Actually, it came originally from Ben Franklin. As EPA Administrator, Mr. Regan will also need to work with states, with tribes, with municipalities to combat contamination in our nation's water supplies from something called PFAS, one of thousands of permanent chemicals. Some are benign, some of them are very, very dangerous to our health. They're called forever chemicals. Unfortunately, this is a critical public health issue that the last administration did not approach with the urgency it deserved. Talked a good game, didn't come through. What do they say in Montana? All hat, no cattle. That's what we saw with respect to these permanent chemicals in the last administration. Well, this is hit home for me. My guess it's hit home for our presiding officer, too, in Wisconsin. But coming from a state, we've got military, one of the biggest airlift bases in the world, Dover Air Force Base. Hugely proud of the Dover Air Force Base, maybe the best airlift base in the world. And for years, we've had, unfortunately, occasionally have incidents, accidents. And we need the firefighters come out and they use this firefighting foam to try to save lives. And in doing that, endanger the lives of other people because the PFAS contamination that's in the firefighting foam. It gets into our groundwater. And it's not just Delaware. It's not just Delaware. It's not just Wisconsin. It's like, last I heard, hundreds, maybe 300 bases around the country where there's a problem with PFAS contamination in the groundwater close to our military bases. If his work in North Carolina on this issue is any indication, Mr. Regan will leave no stone unturned. We'll also be looking to the EPA Administrator to ensure cleaner air by reestablishing the legal basis for the mercury and air toxics standard, which were upended by an administration more interested in protecting special interest than they were in keeping mercury out of our air and our water supply. These standards have been shown over time to be cost-effective, and they are supported by major coal-fired utilities across this country. Let me say that again. These standards have been shown over time not only to be cost-effective, but they are supported by major coal-fired utilities across this country. As Administrator Michael Regan will also oversee the phase-down of something called HFCs, powerful greenhouse gas used as a refrigerant. Think refrigerators, freezers, air conditioners in our house and our cars. They do a good job of keeping it cool and our food cool. Unfortunately, they're about 1,000 times worse, more dangerous than carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, 1,000 times worse. Last Congress, I was proud to help lead a bipartisan effort with a couple of our Republican colleagues, John Neely Kennedy and John Barrasso, to phase down the production of these harmful chemicals while giving American manufacturers a leg up in making the coolants of the future. How many jobs will flow from this? Tens of thousands of American jobs. How much economic opportunity for American companies? Billions and billions of dollars. And, oh, by the way, I should hasten to add, you know, we hear from scientists and sort of that the turning point for us in terms of climate change, in which we can't turn back, is about 2 degrees Celsius for the balance of this century. 2 degrees. Our phase down of hydrofluorocarbon is worth a 0.5 degree Celsius just by itself. This is one thing. So this is a huge thing, and we did it bipartisan way here in the Senate and the House. Very grateful to everyone for their support. Let me add a couple of more points if I can. Madam President, Mr. Regan will need to help craft emission standards for cars, trucks, and vans that will fight climate change and help keep America in the lead in clean car revolution. We heard not long ago from our friends at GM. GM announced that beginning in 2035, they're not going to be building and selling vehicles powered by gasoline or diesel. Think about that. That's like 14 years from now. I think Ford may have announced in Europe that they're not going to be building vehicles that drive or are powered by gasoline or diesel in Europe in like, I think 2030, like it's in nine years. This is coming. And so the question is, will we be ready for it? Will we take advantage of it? Will we be able to find in this adversity of climate change economic opportunity? Yes, we can. And especially with respect to the kind of vehicles that we're going to build and drive into the future. Michael Regan's tenure in North Carolina is, I think, a testament to his ability to bring people together and work across the political divide. He spearheaded what's considered to be the largest coal ash cleanup settlement in the U.S. history. He successfully led the negotiations that resulted in the cleanup of Cape Fear River, right where my wife used to work for the DuPont company, the Cape Fear DuPont plant. And he created North Carolina's first ever Environmental Justice and Equity Advisory Board. Mr. Regan has been able to do these things and much more by bringing people together to find bipartisan, lasting policy compromises, all while never compromising on his principles. He and I both believe in the adage that bipartisan solutions are lasting solutions, and we could use a few more of those around here. That ability to unite people in common purpose, to approach his role as a public servant with humility, with empathy and grace, that central part of Mr. Regan's character has been demonstrated throughout his public service and his nomination process. Interestingly, 23 of our country's national agricultural organizations wrote to my committee, to our committee, the Environment and Public Works Committee, late last year, to recommend him for the job. Most people might say, well, big deal. Well, it was a big deal. How often do we have like dozens of major national agricultural organizations stepping up and say, we want to embrace this candidate to be the head of the Environmental Protection Agency? Not very often, but they did in this case. And they highlighted his, and I'll quote, his established record of listening to all stakeholders, including farmers and ranchers, close quote. And they applauded his pragmatic approach, writing that, quote, during his tenure, he has worked to find practical, sound solutions to myriad environmental issues in the state, close quote. We heard the same sentiment in his nomination hearing before the Environment and Public Works Committee. Throughout his testimony and questioning, Mr. Regan made it clear that he will be an administrator, an EPA administrator for red states, just like he will be an EPA administrator for blue states. He listened to concerns from both sides of the dais, made commitments to work with anyone to solve a problem facing their constituents. That's what helped earn him a 14-6 bipartisan vote of approval coming out of the EPW committee. I remember, Madam President, us measuring the amount of time from someone's name being actually submitted by a president to actually, before I even had a hearing, much less got somebody to report out, measured in months. In months. In this case, we're talking about weeks, and God willing, hours from this afternoon. But believe it or not, it is a committee hearing before a committee a couple of weeks ago. He was introduced to the committee by 2 senators from his state. Does that sound like a big deal? Maybe not. But they're both Republicans. They're both Republicans. And we heard from one of them, Tom Tillis, that Mr. Regan, quote, has earned a reputation for being a thoughtful leader, willing to engage, close quote. His colleague in North Carolina, Senator Burr, underscored Mr. Regan's ability to listen, saying that organizations across North Carolina and across the country support Mr. Regan for administrator because, quote, they understand they will not always agree with every decision handed on by EPA, but they know and trust they will receive a fair hearing. A Democratic nominee recommended by 2 Republican senators from the same state. Honest to God, we don't see that every day. And I do want to just say a special shout out and thanks to Richard Burr and Tom Tillis for doing that and supporting Mr. Reagan's nomination. Michael Regan understands that the climate change shouldn't be a partisan issue. Its impact rather hits red states and blue states alike. Wildfires rage across California while floods in Florida damage homes and roads. Deadly ice storms endanger the power supply in Texas, while the drought in New Mexico harms farming and puts people at risk. Water contamination near an Air Force base in Delaware harms families just like that contamination near a National Guard base in South Dakota. And dirty air from a power plant in Ohio or West Virginia can make their way into neighboring states like ours and like Maryland, our neighboring states, like New Jersey. The problems before our next EPA administrator, and hopefully it'll be Michael Regan, those problems are great. But as Albert Einstein once said, in adversity lies opportunity. Think about that. In adversity lies opportunity. We have an opportunity here to fulfill our moral obligation to be good stewards of this planet, and we can seize on that opportunity if we have the right leader in place to make it happen. During my years in the Navy, then as governor of Delaware, I learned firsthand that leadership is maybe the most important thing in the success of any organization I've ever been part of. I don't care if it's a business, I don't care if it's a state, I don't care if it's a Senate or a House, a hospital, a school. Leadership is always the key, always the key. The leader sets a tone, helps write the rules of the road, and makes sure that those working under him or her are doing what's right. I learned a lot from really good leaders, and frankly, I've learned a few things from really awful leaders. And I suspect, if truth be known, we would all say the same. But leaders are, the best leaders are humble, not haughty. They have the heart of a servant. They understand that their job is to serve, not to be served. Leaders have the courage to stay out of step when everyone else is marching to the wrong tune. They understand their job is to unite, not divide. They build bridges, not walls. Leaders surround themselves with the best people they can find. When the team does well, the leader gives the credit to the team. When the team falls short, the leader takes the blame. Leaders don't build themselves up by tearing other people down. They're aspirational. They appeal to people's better angels. French philosopher Camus once said the leaders are purveyors of hope. Think about that, purveyors of hope. Leaders always seek to do what is right, not what is easy or expedient. They focus on excellence in everything they do. If it's not perfect, they say, let's just make it better. Leaders treat other people the way they want to be treated. And finally, when leaders know they're right, they're sure they're right, they don't give up. They just don't give up. Michael Regan is that kind of leader. We need that kind of leader. And I'm convinced that he is a leader we need for this critical role at this critical time in our nation's history. And so, Madam Chair and colleagues, as chairman of the Senate Committee on the Environment and Public Works, I urge all of our colleagues to support his nomination. With that, Madam President, I yield the floor.